forgiveness. All my life I've been blind, now I see. Mankind is one, all religions agree. Abdul Bahai. The lessons of your life are here to follow. Now this broken winged bird, whose flight is very slow, has a way to go.
Modimo we ntshafatsa o bo itumedise moa wa me, itshekise pelo ya me, sedifatsa tlhaloganyo ya me, ke baya tsotlhe tsa botshelo jwa me mo seatleng sa gago. Wena o mokaedi wa me le botshabelo jwa me. Ga nkitla ke tlhola ke utlwa botlhoko kgotsa ke hutsafala. Ke tla nna motho yo itumelang, yo ipelang. Modimo we, ga nkitla ke tlhola ke tlalelwa, mme ke tla itse matshwenyega go ntlhorontsha. Ga nkitla ke akanyetsa ruri ka dilo tse di sa eletsegeng tsa botshelo. Modimo we, wena o tsala tota mo go nna, go gaisa fa nna ke ka itsayang ka gone. Ke ineela mo go wena, Morena we. Abdul Bahai.
سبحانك اللهم يا إلهي، أسألك باسمك الأعظم الذي به أشرقت شمس أمرك عن أفق وحيك، بأن لا تجعلنا محروما من نفحات التي تمر عن شطر عنايتك، ثم جعلنا يا إلهي خالصا لوجهك ومنقطعا عما واحشرنا في زمرة عبادك الذين ما منعتهم إشارات البشرية عن التوجه إلى المنظر الحديث. أي ربي فادخلنا في ظل رحمتك الكبرى، ثم احفظنا من عبادك الذين كفروا باسمك الأبهى، وشربنا زلال خمر عنايتك ورحيق فضلك والطافك، إنك أنت المقتدر على ما تشاء، وإنك أنت الغفور الرحيم. أي ربي فاستقمنا على حبك بين خلقك، لأن هذا أعظم عطيتك لبريتك، وإنك أنت أرحم الراحمين.
He is the all-glorious. O God, my God, lowly and tearful, I raise my suppliant hands to thee, and cover my face in the dust of that threshold of thine, exalted above the knowledge of the learned, and the praise of all that glorify thee. Graciously look upon thy servant, humble and lowly at thy door, with the glances of the eye of thy mercy, and immerse him in the ocean of thine eternal grace. Lord, he is a poor and lowly servant of thine, enthralled and imploring thee, captive in thy hand, praying fervently to thee, trusting in thee, in tears before thy face, calling to thee and beseeching thee, saying, O Lord my God, give me thy grace to serve thy loved ones. Strengthen me in my servitude to thee. Illumine my brow with the light of adoration in thy court of holiness, and of prayer to thy kingdom of grandeur. Help me to be selfless at the heavenly entrance of thy gate, and aid me to be detached from all things within thy holy precincts. Lord, give me to drink from the chalice of selfishness, with its robe clothed around me, and in the ocean of its ocean immerse me. Make me as dust in the pathway of thy loved ones, and grant that I may offer up my soul from the earth, ennobled by the footsteps of thy chosen ones in thy path, O Lord of glory in the highest. With this prayer that thy servant called thee, at dawntide and in the night season, fulfill his heart's desire, O Lord. Illumine his heart Gladden his bosom, kindle his light, that he may serve thy cause and thy servants. Thou art the bestower, the pitiful, the most bountiful, the gracious, the merciful, the compassionate.
Au flot parfumé de ton éternité, laisse-moi m'abreuver, ô mon Dieu. Et au fruit de l'arbre de ton existence, permets-moi de goûter, ô mon espoir. Ô source cristalline de ton amour, permets que j'apaise ma soif, ô ma gloire. Et sous l'ombre de ton éternelle providence, laisse-moi demeurer, ô ma lumière. Dans les prairies de ton approche, en ta présence, laisse-moi circuler, ô mon bien-aimé, et à la droite du trône de ta miséricorde, laisse-moi siéger, ô mon désir. Qu'un souffle des brises embaumées de ta joie passe sur moi, au but de ma vie, et qu'au paradis suprême de ta réalité, je trouve accès, ô mon adoré. Laisse-moi écouter la mélodie chantée par la colombe de ton unité, ô toi le resplendissant, et par l'esprit de ton pouvoir et de ta puissance, vivifie-moi, ô toi mon bienfaiteur. Que je reste constant dans l'esprit de ton amour, ô mon soutien, et que mes pas soient affermis dans le sentier de ton bon plaisir, ô mon Créateur. Dans le jardin de ton immortalité, en ta présence, laisse-moi demeurer à jamais, ô toi qui es miséricordieux pour moi, et sur le siège de ta gloire, établis-moi, ô toi qui es mon maître. Au ciel de ta tendre bonté, élève-moi, ô toi mon animateur, et vers l'étoile matinale de ta direction, conduis-moi, ô toi qui m'attires. Lors des révélations de ton invisible esprit, daigne m'appeler, ô toi qui es la cause de mon existence et l'objet de mon plus grand désir, et vers l'essence embaumée de ta beauté que tu voudras manifester, fais que je retourne, ô toi qui es mon Dieu. Tu as le pouvoir de faire ce qui te plaît, tu es en vérité le très élevé, le tout glorieux, le suprême.
Aloha. It is time, dear friends, to reflect on the beauty of Abdul Baha by looking into the eyes of these fortunate friends amongst us who had the bounty of meeting the Master, of looking into his eyes and gazing upon his beauty. The beauty that for me, as I'm sure for many of you, is forever made graphic in that incomparable portrait of the Master taken in Adrianople when he was 24 years old. Can you picture in your mind an ideal of beauty more perfect than that? It is a beauty that radiates from the core of his being to the outer form of his noble visage. Let us vicariously share in the experiences and recollections of these dear and honored friends who early in their lives had the blessing of meeting with the Master. Of course, foremost in that group is our dear and precious Amatul Baha Ruhiya Khanum. When Abdul Baha stayed in the home of her parents in Montreal, she had many occasions to bask in his love and undoubtedly could ennoble us with many recollections. We had the honor of hearing her as the emissary of the Universal House of Justice giving the message of that august body to this Congress yesterday, and we will have the privilege of hearing her again tomorrow. Today, I would like to introduce to you first Mr. Shinji Yamamoto. His true name, given to him by Abdul Baha, is Hussein. His father was the first Japanese Bahai. And he worked in the home of Mrs. Helen Goodall in Oakland, California. And on the occasion of the Master's visit to Mrs. Goodall's house, this name was bestowed upon Mr. Yamamoto, and he had the blessing of sitting on the Master's lap. Next is Mrs. Betty Lant Toombs, who as an infant was raised by Abdul Baha in his arms, and he whispered something in her ears. She says to this day, no one has been able to tell her what it was, and she is looking forward to meeting the Master again and asking him to repeat what he said. And we have Mrs. Sylvia Parmalee. At the age of 12, in the year 1920, she had the bounty of being on pilgrimage, and she's going to tell us something of her recollection.
It was indeed a great bounty, which I came into because I simply had the right kind of mother. My mother wished very, very much to see the Master, and so we went to Haifa in 1920. It was really nothing that I would have undertaken on my own. It's just that I feel thankful that she had the wisdom and the insight to see the bounty that would come from this. Every time we were in the Master's home for about 6 days. We're at his table at dinner every evening, and we were at meetings where he spoke a number of times. He was always, when he saw me and when we had interviews with him, very, very happy, very encouraging. His eyes lighted up with smiles, and it was a wonderful experience to see him. He helped me for a moment overcome a great shyness I had, because I felt that something new came over me when I was in his presence that I had not expected and I had no control over. It was a very happy, happy experience. When I came to depart from Haifa, I should tell you that he gave me a Bahai name, Bahai. I was already called Sylvia, so that name stuck with me, but the name is being handed on in my family to my granddaughter. When we had the final evening and before we left, I remember so clearly how he spoke to me, and he said, Sylvia Badie, very good. Kaylee Koob, I believe he said. And he said it in this wonderful voice. His voice, I think, made more impression on me than any other one thing about being with him. It was the most beautiful musical voice, strong and full with rich overtones. And I remember thinking on that last evening, if I could just carry the name, the feeling, the memory of that voice in my mind for the rest of my life, I would be happy. But I must say that this visit, which I was privileged to have, has really blessed my whole entire life. And I feel very, very fortunate to have had it.
And next is Mrs. Bahia Randall Winkler, who remembers the master coming to their home when she was 5 years old.
Thank you very much. However, I think all this audience back here is so wonderful, we sort of have to talk to both of them. This story of a little girl who was 5 years old and with the master has been requested for this program. We lived in a very big house, and my favorite place in the house was the bottom of step in a long flight of stairs going up to the second story. And I used to sit there all the time, and then I could see everything going on the first floor. I liked it. I was not very fond of adults. I liked my mother and father, I loved them. But no other adults really entered into my childhood existence. I looked at all the others, and it was always suspicion in my mind because they were always saying no. And this day, it was just the same. I was sitting on the bottom step, and my nurse called down and said, Margaret, you must come upstairs and change your dress. A very important person is coming. I said, no. I didn't intend to do it at all. And we argued back and forth a bit, and then suddenly, everything changed. It was as if there was sunshine around me, all around me. And I looked, and there was nothing coming in the windows, but here I was, feeling as if I was in the most beautiful sunshine. And it began to change me, you see, and I got a better disposition. And I said to the nurse, my nurse, I'll come and change my dress. So I went upstairs and I put on my best dress with the blue sash, and I asked for a pencil and paper. And she gave it to me, and then I scribbled on it. Then I went downstairs, and we waited for Abdul Baha. And when he came and walked in the front door, I realized that here was the sunshine. I had felt it long before he came to the house, my blessing. And then he went out to the house and out onto a porch where my mother was lying, dying of tuberculosis, and he healed her immediately. Then he came back in the house, and he stood by the library door, And he said, the house is a beautiful house, but someday it will become a beautiful home. Now, all the time that he was talking to my father, he was sort of looking at me, you know, with a twinkle in his eye, and he was saying little things to me. It was a silent conversation, but I felt, oh, here is somebody who loves even naughty little girls. And then I said to myself, and I felt him sort of saying this to me, oh, you see, I really did come to see you as much as your mother. And he had such a wonderful love, and you really were in the sunshine, and you felt it. And it penetrated into your heart, and you belonged to him. When he left the house, the sun disappeared, but that kind of sunshine never leaves one's heart. And it was that moment that I became a Bahai and have been ever since. Thank you very much.
And Mr. Aziz Yazdi. Who, in the final 3 years of the Master's life, from 1918 to 1921, lived virtually in the household of the Master and is going to share with us some of his recollections.
Allah, our friends. As Mr. Banani said, after the end of the First World War, the beloved Master asked my father to bring the family to Haifa and establish our residence there. And because of this, I had the bounty and the privilege to attain the presence of the Master often. One day, I was in Bahai playing in the gardens, and the beloved Master came out of the pilgrim house. I bowed with reverence. He looked at me, smiled, and walked towards the shrine of Baha'u'llah. I don't know what came over me, but I had a feeling like a power pulling me towards Abdul Baha, and I followed him. I am certain he knew I was following him, but he never turned back to look at me or to tell me not to. I continued following him until he reached the entrance to the shrine of Baha'u'llah, and was still behind him. He went in, and I followed him. I remember exactly the spot where he stood and went on his knees in front of the shrine of Baha'u'llah. And then he got up and chanted the tablet of visitation. The distance between the beloved Master and myself was about 4 to 5 yards, not more. But when the voice of the beloved Master was heard first, something happened, and I asked myself, where am I? In this holy spot. Here is the Qibla where Baha'u'llah lies, and here is the beloved Master chanting the tablet of visitation, and I'm the only one witnessing that. This is nothing but the grace, the bounty, and generosity of Abdul Baha.
reflect, dear friends, that in the annals of religious history, it's the first time that the center of the covenant that unifies the whole body of the faith is personified in the reality of a perfect exemplar. The most great branch, Ghusn Azam, the most great mystery of God, Sirrullah al-Azam, the telling term of address by which his exalted father called him, Sarkar Agha, the master, and the title which he preferred for himself, Abdul Baha. How moving it is to realize our nearness to him. In the perspective of history, we shall be seen as hardly removed from the dawnbreakers of the heroic age of our faith. In 1944, when I first arrived in San Francisco, virtually every member of the Baha'i community of that city had met Abdul Baha. To my 17-year-old perspective, 1912, the year of his visit, and even 1921, the year of his passing, was farther away than it is today. Standing next to these honored souls who met the Master, and there must be many amongst us here who have known friends who looked upon the Blessed Beauty himself, gives us a truly palpable sense of our nearness to them. Compared with the panorama of Christian history, the time span that separates us from the passing of Abdul Baha, in that time span, in Christian era, the Gospels had not been written yet. We stand directly on the shoulders of the heroic men and women who had the vision and the resolve to lay the foundations of the new world order. We are, every one of us, in the perspective of history, true pioneers, early enlistees in the Master's heavenly army. Let us call for the assistance of the cohorts of Supreme Concourse and march on to new victories.
ای بانی بیت خدا، ای مرکز عهد بها، دستم بگیر دستم بگیر عبدالبها احسان بکن، جان مرا قربان بکن، قربانگی سوان بکن، دستم بگیر عبدالبها، دستم بگیر دستم بگیر عبدالبها خود آگهی، هم جان ستان هم جان دهی، هم هادی هر گمرهی، دستم بگیر عبدالبها، دستم بگیر عبدالبها، گرچه ز عالم بی‌برم، لطف تو گر باشد برم، پس صاحب هر کشورم. ای یهوه رب جلیل، ای منجی حزب خلیل، رحمی بکن بر این علی، دستم بگیر عبدالبها، دستم بگیر عبدالبها.
Dastam Begir Abdul Baha. Take my hand, take our hand, Abdul Baha. Friends, we will now experience historic moments in the development of our faith through a dramatic vignette. 4 American Baha'is who met the beloved Master Abdul Baha in 1912 will open their hearts to you. Each one will reveal how she or he came to a personal understanding of the power of the covenant, and how that understanding arose out of obedience. Obedience to the center of the covenant, Abdul Baha. Let us now go back to 1912. We're in the city of the covenant and meet Juliet Thompson, Lua Getzinger, Howard McNutt, and yes, Louis Gregory.
When I was 10 years old, I began to dream of someday painting a portrait of Jesus Christ. I think I always knew I would paint, even before that time. But when I was 10, I remember we were living with my grandparents. My father had just died and my mother had no money. It was then that this very presumptuous idea took hold of me. I became determined to paint Jesus. I even prayed that I might. Oh God, I prayed. You know Christ didn't look the way all the pictures of him look. Please let me paint him when I grow up as the King of men. And I never lost hope of this. All through art school, until I met the Master. When I saw Abdul Baha, then I knew no one could paint the Christ. It was on pilgrimage in Akka when I began my diary. Oh, Akka, white-walled city by the sea where I dedicated my heart to Abdul Baha. But like my diary, my dedication was also a lifelong effort. When you returned to America, Juliet, the Master said, I want you to do your best to bring about unity. You're going back to New York to serve me. But how could I unify the Friends when my own heart was divided? You see, I was in love with the Reverend Dr. Percy Grant. His Church of the Ascension was just a half block from my studio. For years, I would go there to hear him preach. Admiration soon became something more. I fell in love. I've only had one strong love in my life, and that was Percy, the charismatic rector who not only championed social justice, but preached world brotherhood as well. What better partner could be found for me? But in Akka, Abdul Baha said I might have to break with Percy. Either you must marry him, he said, or separate yourself from him. Cut yourself entirely from him. Why was this asked of me? Maybe I was more anxious to lead Percy Grant to the kingdom than to go there myself. Maybe I counted on romantic union with Percy more than eternal union with God. After all, I did miss spending an extra day with Abdul Baha because of my haste to get back to New York. And to Percy, oh, the Master knew my heart so well. Can you transfer this love to God, he asked. That was the question, could I? There are degrees of love, the master said. And then he explained he carried a measuring rod in his hand by which he measured the love of the friends. And that rod was obedience. All that winter I refused to see Percy. My heart was still attached to him, but I felt somehow in refusing to see him, I was at least in part obeying the master. Then a note arrived from Percy. It was an invitation. He wanted Abdu'l-Baha's first public address in New York to be at the church where he himself was minister. If half-hearted obedience brings forth such fruit, I thought, what will full obedience bring forth? Oh, on that day at the Church of the Ascension, Percy arranged everything with the touch of an artist, everything choreographed so perfectly. First the procession with flowers and music. Then Percy addressed the congregation. He read a prophecy from the Old Testament pointing directly to the promised day, to Baha'u'llah. Then on cue, the choir burst into a chorus of Jesus Lives Again, and Percy introduced the Master. I sat there, happier it seemed to me than I had been in my entire life. I was in the presence of my Lord, and the one I loved best in all this human world had at last recognized him. Maybe all my suffering had been for this reconciliation. For what else could that exquisite service have meant, with its theme of resurrection stressed throughout, so bold and daring a proclamation in the very church itself? It never occurred to me to think it might really have meant something else. After the service, I waited joyously in the rectory for Percy. At last he rushed in, his cheeks flushed. "My darling," he said, "my darling." "You made everything so beautiful," I told him. "I can't find the right words to thank you." But then something in his look, something false, awakened me. "Julie," he said, "my darling, I did it all for you." And then I realized he had staged a performance. He had used the Master as a pawn to woo me, manipulating the cause for his own purposes. I saw then, with complete clarity, how right Abdu'l-Baha had been. Horrified, sick at heart, I turned away. Thank God I had obeyed.
My grandmother was entirely of African blood. She was a slave in South Carolina. Her white master kept her as mistress and made her pregnant with my mother. After my mother was born, she too became a slave on her white father's plantation. After the Civil War, my grandmother and mother were freed. The most common response to oppression is to hate or to stay put in one's place. But my grandmother's response was to raise a grandson who could not be intimidated. She was illiterate, but she schooled me in dignity and courage. She taught me that whites were not just the oppressor, but also my playmates, my school teachers, and my grandfather. She taught me the truth, the whole truth, that my people had suffered and continue to suffer from prejudice and injustice. But whites were my people too. But a young man gets angry when he sees hundreds of lynchings every year. White mobs would destroy Negro property and nothing would be done. My grandmother had saved my heart from bitterness for the white man, but she could not save my mind from suspicion from him. I began outlining strategies for black action. I was influenced by W.E.B. Du Bois and his cry for civil rights. Religion held no interest for me at this point. I had been seeking but not finding the truth, and so had given up. But when I met Abdul Baha, my vision changed. The shining reality of the Master, the personification of all Bahai ideals, beckoned to me, and I became a confirmed believer. Abdul Baha expressed the hope that I would become the means whereby the white and black people would close their eyes to racial differences. I took his words to heart and obeyed them as command. I abandoned my profession as a lawyer and became a racial amity worker. The majority of my friends thought that I had become mentally deranged, unbalanced. A leading Washington newspaper gave me 2 columns of ridicule for becoming a Bahai. But all this I could bear. What pained me more was the fact that the Baha'is were still holding segregated meetings. Washington, D.C. was a thoroughly segregated society. Even the churches were segregated. But if this was a new religion dedicated to unity, why were its believers divided? Baha'u'llah's writings said this was wrong. Why did the Baha'is not meet all together in one place? Are the Baha'is full of prejudice like other people? Abdul Baha again came to my rescue. He insisted that the Baha'is hold integrated meetings. But Abdul Baha did not stop with the Baha'is. While he was in Washington, a formal luncheon was planned in his honor at the Persian embassy. Alexander Perry, the North Pole explorer, and Alexander Graham Bell were just 2 of the prominent people in attendance. Now, place cards have been set out next to all the plates in order to seat people according to strict Washington protocol. But at the last moment, just as the guests were about to be seated, Abdu'l-Baha gathered up all the cards. He shuffled them and then redistributed them around the table. He then took me by the hand and led me to the head of the table, to the place of honor. And this at an almost all-white luncheon. I had been taken to new heights by the Master. With one light and loving gesture, Abdu'l-Baha pointed out the foolishness of prejudice and segregation both. Abdu'l-Baha urged me to become the means whereby the white and black people would close their eyes to racial difference. He told me not to look upon my limited capacity, but upon the bounties of the Lord. He also introduced me to Miss Louisa Matthew, a Bahai from London, a white woman. Abdu'l-Baha mentioned in our presence that interracial marriage was a good way to end racial prejudice. I remembered the words of my grandmother. The whites are not just your oppressors. They're also your playmates, your teachers, and your grandfather. On September the 27th, 1912, in New York City, the city of the covenant, I was married to Louisa Matthew. We were middle-aged, mature persons. We were quite fond of each other and respected each other. But our union was the work of Abdu'l-Baha. Our love for the Master gave us both the courage to confront the social prejudice of those days. In 38 states of the Union, it was illegal for a black and white couple to travel together. Our marriage was difficult, but it was a happy one. How could it not be? Because it was Abdu'l-Baha that brought us together.
The week I witnessed the Master lead Louis Gregory to the head of the table was the week this painting came into existence. I was visiting with Edna when Abdu'l-Baha suddenly entered the room. "I'm going out for a drive," he said, "but wait till I return, Edna, and you too, Juliet, wait. I will see you in a short time." So I waited and waited. 6:30 came, then 7 o'clock. We were due at the Elkins at 7:30, and their house was a long way off, rather indirect on the bus line. "Go, Juliet," Edna urged. "I'll explain." But how could I leave? My Lord had told me to stay. So I waited. It was a little after 7 o'clock when Abdu'l-Baha came back from his drive. When he entered the room where he had left me, and where, of course, I was still waiting, he said, "Ah, Juliet, for your sake I returned. Mrs. Hemmick wanted to keep me, but I had asked you to wait. Therefore, I returned." After a pause, he added, "Would you like to come up tomorrow and paint me?" So I learned once again the reward of obedience. Such a reward for such a small act of obedience. My childhood dream was about to be fulfilled at last. Once in Haifa, the Master said to me, "Keep my words, obey my commands, and you will marvel at the results." And by a miracle, I wasn't late for dinner. The dinner at the Elkins had been postponed by half an hour.
In the early days of the faith in New York, we were confused about the station of Abdu'l-Baha. Arthur Dodge, the designer of the Dodge motor car, who also established the first Bahai spiritual assembly in New York, Arthur Dodge was one of a number of Baha'is who taught that the Master was the return of Christ. Dodge. He also ridiculed me for allowing an Eastern Swami to live in my house. I'm afraid we were often at odds. In fact, we rarely attended a spiritual assembly meeting when we knew the other was going to be there. For I knew that the Master was not a manifestation of God, not the return of Christ. He is a man, a very great man of as great a station as St. Peter, but in spirit no different from other men. I knew that we too could attain to the station of the Master if only we would obey Baha'u'llah's teachings. You can see how wrong I was. For in teaching that Abdu'l-Baha was like St. Peter, I implied that the Master could make mistakes. The way Peter 3 times denied Christ, and the center of the covenant cannot err. That is the whole significance and safeguard of the covenant. Nonetheless, I taught this notion in all the Baha'i communities to which I traveled, and in 1 year I managed to travel 25,000 miles to 100 communities. But my teaching that Abdu'l-Baha was like St. Peter caused confusion in the Baha'i meetings. And finally, the Baha'is stopped inviting me to speak. In Washington, D.C., Philadelphia, Baltimore, I was no longer welcome. Some of the Baha'is even refused to associate with me. I was shunned. Then, a special election was held to remove me from the New York Spiritual Assembly. I was cast aside. I felt discarded, thrown away. All my services became ashes in my mouth. Then, Abdu'l-Baha came to New York to educate us as to his station as the center of the covenant. When he arrived, he treated me like a son. He allowed me to meet his ship and to escort him back to his hotel. He permitted my wife and me to make a short motion picture of him at my Brooklyn home. He also consented to my request to record his blessed voice chanting a prayer. Then my test came. There were covenant breakers in Chicago, followers of Keirullah. Abdu'l-Baha, the center of the covenant, dispatched me to Chicago to warn and reprimand them. I was also instructed to sever my relationship with Keirullah. This was very difficult for me. Keirullah had taught me the faith. He was my spiritual father. Well, I arrived in Chicago and I met with the covenant breakers. But I did nothing about the diseased situation. Worse, I even wired back to the master that I had found them all to be angels.
Howard McNutt had just returned to New York. I was standing with Abdu'l-Baha on the second floor of the Kinney's home when Howard arrived. The master immediately took him into another room. Meanwhile, a large crowd was gathering downstairs, anticipating a talk by Abdu'l-Baha. Finally, the master emerged with Howard. Howard looked wilted. I heard Abdu'l-Baha say to him, "Go down and say to the people, I was like Saul. Now I am Paul, for I see."
But I don't see.
The master repeated, "Go down and say," I pulled at his coattail. "For God's sake, Howard," I said, "go down!"
Leave me alone.
The master commanded, "Go down!" Poor Howard. Finally he turned, and as he went down the stairs to face his ordeal, his back looked shrunken to me. The master leaned against the stair rail, his head thrown back, his eyes closed in anguished prayer. I sat on the top step, watching the master. This is like the agony in the garden, I thought. Christ's Gethsemane.
I was like Saul.
We both could hear Howard stumbling through his admission. He seemed to be dragging it out of himself.
Now I am Paul, for I see.
Nonetheless, when Howard came back upstairs, the master deluged him with love. Abdu'l-Baha ran forward to meet him, and as he ran, his arms open wide, he looked like a great flying bird. He enfolded Howard in a close embrace, kissed his face and neck, welcomed with ecstasy this broken man who, though bewildered, had obeyed. He had obeyed the center of the covenant.
Whatever Abdu'l-Baha wishes me to do, I will do. And whatever he wishes me not to do, I will not do.
For his obedience, Howard McNutt was given the privilege of compiling all the master's talks in America. He published them in a volume called The Promulgation of Universal Peace. Abdu'l-Baha told him, "This service shall cause thee to acquire an effulgent face in the Abha kingdom, and shall make thee the object of praise and gratitude of the friends in the East and the West."
The master had also asked Julie to paint my portrait. I don't know why. I certainly wasn't very taken with the idea. In any case, she started painting me while she was still working on the portrait of the master. Now, this gave me an idea. You see, Abdu'l Baha had expressed his desire that I travel to California. But I dreaded the thought of being separated from the master. I wanted to obey him, I really did. Just not right away. Did you tell them about the poison ivy? She's ignoring me. Julie doesn't like to encourage me. I'll tell you what happened. Abdu'l Baha was preparing to leave New York for California, and he asked that I go ahead to make arrangements for his visit there. But I dreaded the thought of being separated from the master. I don't know what came over me, but at the Unity Feast in Teaneck, New Jersey, I deliberately walked through poison ivy. Back and forth, right through it, I trampled until my feet were thoroughly poisoned. Well, he can't send me to California now, can he? Julie, go to the master and say, how can Lua travel? Look at her feet.
I don't know why, but I did. I went and told Abdu'l Baha what had happened, but he laughed out loud. Then he handed me an apple and a pomegranate. Take these to Louis, he said. Tell her to eat them, and she will be cured. Oh, precious Lua. Strange mixture of disobedience and obedience, and all for love. I think that's why the master didn't mind her disobedience. It was out of love, it was not out of rebelliousness. When it came to the covenant, Lua was always obedient. She taught May Maxwell the faith. She traveled alone to India. She pioneered to Egypt and died there. I shall never forget her. First seizing the apple and then the pomegranate and obediently chewing them all the way through, till not even a pomegranate seed was left. Obediently eating the cure, which was certain to send her to California. Later that afternoon, we were surprised by a visit from the master himself. He drew back the sheets and looked at Lua's feet. They were healed. Abdu'l Baha burst out laughing. He knew Lua would always be firm in the covenant.
I had one more strategy. I had to try. As I said, Abdu'l Baha had asked Julie to paint my portrait. But she'd only had one sitting with me when the master wanted to send me to California. Julie, please go to the master and say, if Lua's in California, how can I paint her? The portrait has already begun. But of course, when she went to the master, he only burst out laughing. As usual, he saw right through me. Needless to say, I obeyed and went to California. Instead, the master called Julie in to finish the portrait of him. It was June 19th, 1912. Now, earlier that day, the master had passed Julie and myself on the stairs. We both remarked that we felt a peculiar power in his step as he passed, as though some terrific force had possession of him. Oh, it was a force too strong to be caged in a body. Later, when Julie was putting the finishing touches on the portrait, the master closed his eyes and dozed off. Julie put down her paintbrush. What she saw was too sacred, too formidable to portray. And then, with a great flash, like lightning, Abdu'l Baha opened his eyes. The room seemed to rock like a ship in the storm with the power that was released. The master was blazing. 1,000 veils, concealing his station as the center of the covenant. had suddenly been burnt away. And we were exposed to the very flame itself.
Herald of the Covenant, he called her. Never will I forget that moment. The flashing eyes of Abdu'l-Baha, the reverberations of his voice, the power that still rocked the room. God of lightning and thunder, I thought. Then his voice boomed. I appoint you, Lua, herald of the covenant. And I am the covenant appointed by Baha'u'llah, he said of himself, and no one can refute his word. Go forth and proclaim, this is the covenant of God in your midst. A great joy seemed to lift Lua up. She looked like a winged angel.
Oh, recreate me, that I may do this work for thee.
The master then sent Lua downstairs to proclaim the covenant to the friends.
When the ocean of my presence hath ebbed, and the book of my revelation is ended, turn your faces toward him who hath branched from this ancient root.
The master soon followed Lua downstairs, and then spoke himself about his unique station as center of the covenant. It was then he declared New York City the city of the covenant. Then, to underscore this historic declaration, Abdu'l-Baha instructed that Baha'u'llah's Tablet of the Branch be immediately translated and read aloud to the entire gathering. The believers crowded into the room. Some even sat on the stairs, listening attentively to the words of Baha'u'llah.
There hath branched from the Sadrat al-Muntaha this sacred and glorious being, this branch of holiness. Well is it with him that hath sought his shelter and abideth beneath his shadow. Render thanks unto God, O people, for his appearance. For verily he is the most great favor unto you, the most perfect bounty upon you. And through him, every moldering bone is quickened. Whoso turneth toward him hath turned toward God. And whoso turneth away from him hath turned away from my beauty, hath repudiated my proof, and transgressed against me. He is the trust of God amongst you, his charge within you, his manifestation unto you. We have sent him down in the form of a human temple. Blessed and sanctified be God, who createth whatsoever he willeth, through his inviolable, his infallible decree.
Behold a candle, how it gives its light. It weeps its life away, drop by drop, to give its flame. You must die to the world, and so be born again, and enter to the kingdom of heaven. Look at me, follow me, be as I am. Abdul Baha, Abdul Baha. You are the angels, if your feet be firm, be steadfast as a rock, that no earthly storm can move. And as you have faith, so shall your powers be, and know that till the end I'm always with you. Look at me, follow me, be as I am. Love mankind, follow me, be as I am. And how I long to travel the world in utmost poverty, and cry out, Ya Bahai, God willing, you may do this for me. Teach mankind, follow me, be as I am. Abdul Baha, Abdul Baha. Serve the cause, follow me,
it is difficult for us to obtain a clear and exact understanding of the role and character of Abdu'l-Baha and the significance of his travels in the West. Those travels represented a service of such heroic proportions that no parallel is to be found in the annals of the first Bahai century. Of his travels in North America, the beloved master Abdu'l-Baha spent by far the longest period of time in New York. He named it the City of the Covenant. Let us now think of those days as we look at a film about Abdu'l-Baha's visit to New York, the City of the Covenant.
Throughout the ages, the city of God is an expression that has been used to describe the guidance that has come to mankind from the heaven of divine will to refresh and transform the earth of human understanding. Through divine guidance, social consciousness has evolved and civilization has advanced. Baha'is believe that a fresh outpouring of God's grace has been given to the world through the revelation of Baha'u'llah, the founder of the Baha'i faith. Early in this century, his son and appointed successor traveled to North America to proclaim the covenant of Baha'u'llah to the peoples of the West. Viewed with the eyes of the Spirit, Abdu'l-Baha may be seen in New York inviting mankind to make its home in the city of the covenant of Baha'u'llah. In his words, the New Jerusalem is none other than divine civilization. It is now ready. Humanity will be brought together as one. When Abdu'l-Baha arrived in 1912, New York was fast becoming a symbol of the modern world. To him, its skyscrapers expressed an aspiration for progress that was typical of the technological age that was coming into being. Truly, it is a wonderful city, he said. New York has made such progress in material civilization. I hope that it may also advance spiritually in the kingdom and covenant of God. I have come for this. The city that welcomed Abdu'l-Baha was on the crest of a wave of optimism about the future. In the busy streets, the master saw a thriving society where everyone hurried to work. New York is a beehive, he said. At that time, 1,000 immigrants a day were streaming through the government reception center on Ellis Island. Most were spreading out across the continent to the mills and factories of the American heartland. Many, however, settled in Manhattan's Lower East Side, making it one of the most densely populated areas on Earth. To the companions of Abdu'l-Baha, it must have seemed as if representatives of all humanity were being drawn together in New York to hear his message. Abdu'l-Baha was attracted by America's interest in the cause of world peace. He had come to New York to speak at the Lake Mohonk Conference on International Arbitration. He believed that the most momentous question of the day was international peace, that a power was needed to prevent war and to proclaim the oneness of humanity. As the master arrived, the country was preparing for a federal election. Social reform was becoming a political issue of national dimensions. Across the country, wherever newspapers could reach, reform measures were being discussed. Abdu'l-Baha was a guest speaker at the 4th annual conference of the NAACP, where he shared the platform with Jane Addams, founder of Hull House in Chicago. As he crossed the continent, the master met with leaders of thought who were actively concerned with the needs of the time. Generally, confidence ran high that remedies for the ills of humankind could be found by advancing science and technology. In Abdu'l-Baha's view, what was needed to resolve the problems of an emerging global society was the union of scientific and moral development, of material and spiritual civilization. Spiritual consciousness is the generating force of human society, he said. Throughout his visit, Abdu'l-Baha addressed issues familiar to us as the major problems of this century. Since 1912, they have expanded in range and complexity. And demand for social action has become a way of life in our time. Abdu'l-Baha put the racist attitudes he found rooted in American culture in a global perspective. He warned that until those prejudices are entirely removed from the people of the world, humanity will not find rest. He saw problems like the extremes of wealth and poverty created by industrial society in an international context. The solution did not lie in the conflict of capital and labor. Fundamentally, the disease afflicting the body politic is lack of love and altruism. Abdu'l-Baha favored the empowerment of women through greater opportunity for education. Social and political progress will not be possible, he said, until man and woman recognize and realize equality. He called on the nations of the world to create an international tribunal to establish the cause of universal peace, because the spirit of the age demands peace. No power on earth can stand before it, he asserted. In 1912, Abdu'l-Baha had no illusions, however, about the impending crises facing humanity. He warned, "The earth is loaded with explosives and deadly instruments. Before long, these weapons of hell shall wreck the edifice of mankind." All the bloodshed of the past has been induced through religious or racial prejudice, or political or patriotic bias. After World War I, he wrote, "Movements newly born and worldwide in their range will exert their utmost for the advancement of their designs." Many in 1912 saw that war on the continent was inevitable. Few, however, realized the vital importance of Abdu'l-Baha's message. It was only in the aftermath of World War I, the unprecedented dislocation of the peoples of Europe, together with worldwide economic depression, that the complacency of the Western world was shaken. Nevertheless, when the League of Nations was established, Abdu'l-Baha praised this faltering effort at international agreement as marking the dawn of the most great peace promised by Baha'u'llah. Commemorating his proclamation of the Covenant of Baha'u'llah in 1912, Abdu'l-Baha called New York the City of the Covenant. To the little band of his followers in America, he explained the truth of his mission. Through the Covenant of Baha'u'llah, a way has been opened for a new relationship between God and humankind in this age. The divine teachings must be sought, he said, for they are the remedies for the ills of mankind. The power of the covenant is the axis of the oneness of the world of humanity. Abdu'l-Baha brought the community together in a feast of unity. He called on the Baha'is to promote the cause of unity among the nations of the world. I desire to make manifest among the friends in America a new light, that they may become a new people, that a new foundation may be laid and complete harmony be realized. For the foundation of Baha'u'llah is love. Since Abdu'l-Baha's visit, a dual process that will ultimately bring about human accord has steadily gained momentum. After a Second World War, the nations have taken another step in the political realm toward unifying the planet. On the New York skyline, the United Nations building has joined the Statue of Liberty as an international symbol of mankind's aspiration toward a new world based on peace and justice. At the same time, through the guidance of the Baha'i teachings, the Baha'is have brought into existence a global community, representative of the diversity of humankind and established in the most remote reaches of the earth. Its affairs are directed by an internationally elected body as conceived in the writings of Baha'u'llah and called the Universal House of Justice. As the revelation of God to our age transforms human consciousness, the political unification of our planet will be seen as a prelude to the fulfillment spoken of 100 years ago by Baha'u'llah. These fruitless strifes, these ruinous wars shall pass away, and the most great peace shall come.
Dear friends, I now have the very great privilege of introducing you to Professor Firuz Kazemzadeh, who will greet us and address us concerning the topic, the beloved Abdu'l-Baha, the center of the covenant of Baha'u'llah. Please join me in welcoming Professor Kazemzadeh.
Friends, Allah Abha, 100 years have passed since the ascension of Baha'u'llah. In only 1 century, his faith has spread over the globe more widely than has any other religion save Christianity, which is almost 2,000 years old. But unlike other religions, the Baha'i faith in its rapid expansion has retained the purity of its doctrine and the unity of its followers. What was the distinguishing characteristic that has allowed the Baha'i faith to spread virtually to every country in the world, to be embraced by members of every race, nationality, culture, and religion, yet preserve the integrity of its teachings and the oneness of its community? That characteristic was Baha'u'llah's covenant. Messengers of God, when they appear, renew the essential teachings of earlier faiths, bring new laws, and release enormous spiritual energies that transform lives, create communities, and lead to the emergence of new civilizations. Yet the invisible power released by divine revelation and flowing through God's messengers also makes it possible for spiritually untransformed human beings to misuse it, turn it to their selfish ends, and pervert its purpose. Two issues fraught with grave dangers confronted the followers of religions of the past the moment their inspired founders left this world. The two issues were authority and interpretation. When Jesus died on the cross, who among the small band of his disciples was the leader? Who was to guide the community and interpret the teachings left by the departed Lord? And when years later those teachings were at last recorded for posterity, who was to determine which recollections of Christ's words and deeds were authentic and which were not? When Muhammad died, who was his lawful successor? Who indeed had an indisputable right to be called Amir al-Mu'mineen, commander of the faithful? As Christianity and Islam spread, they split into sects over questions of doctrine and leadership, because, like religions that had preceded them, they possessed no firmly established principle of succession and of authoritative interpretation of their scriptures. Sectarianism led to strife that forever divided the believers. In religion, interpretation and authority are inseparable, because the sacred scriptures are not only a map to the path of individual salvation, but also contain commandments, laws, and rules that regulate the life of society. Therefore, he who explicates the scriptures and interprets the teachings will inevitably exercise authority in the community. No religion of the past had succeeded in resolving this thorny yet vital issue. The Bahai faith is the first world religion that contains clear provisions for succession to the leadership of its founder and resolves the twin issues of authority and interpretation. Humanity has evolved. The great challenge confronting it in this age is to overcome division and to unite mankind in a single organic whole, which of course cannot be accomplished without solving the problem of authority. In this weighty and incomparable document, Shoghi Effendi, guardian of the cause, writes, that is the book of Abdul Baha's Covenant, its author discloses the character of that excellent and priceless heritage bequeathed by him to his heirs. To guard it, and these are now my own words again, to preserve it and to pass it to future generations and to ensure the unity of the believers, Baha'u'llah, in that will and testament, appointed Abdul Baha the center of the covenant and the authorized interpreter of his father's teachings. This year, as we commemorate the 100th anniversary of Baha'u'llah's passing, we also celebrate the covenant and the person of Abdul Baha, its embodiment and center. Baha'u'llah's covenant is a phenomenon unique in religious history. Abdul Baha himself has testified that from the early days of creation down to the present time, throughout all the divine dispensations, such a firm and explicit covenant has not been entered upon. Equally as unique as the covenant itself was its center. In the book of my covenant, Baha'u'llah proclaims, and you have already heard this quotation today, there hath branched from the Sadrat al-Muntaha this sacred and glorious being, this branch of holiness. Well is it with him that hath sought his shelter and abideth beneath its shadow. As Baha'u'llah prepared to ascend to the realm above, he knew that, to quote the Guardian again, his stupendous task on this earthly plane had been brought to its final consummation. The message with which he had been entrusted had been disclosed to the gaze of all mankind. Above all, the covenant that was to perpetuate the influence of the faith, ensure its integrity, safeguard it from schism, and stimulate its worldwide expansion had been fixed on an inviolable basis. His own beloved son, the apple of his eye, his vicegerent on earth, the executive of his authority, the pivot of his covenant, the shepherd of his flock, the exemplar of his faith, the image of his perfection, the majesty of his revelation, the interpreter of his mind, the architect of his world order, the ensign of his most great peace, the focal point of his unerring guidance. In a word, the occupant of an office without peer or equal in the entire field of religious history, stood guard over it, alert, fearless, and determined to enlarge its limits, blazon abroad its fame, champion its interests, and consummate its purpose. Thus wrote Shoghi Effendi. Abdul Baha was born in Tehran on May 23, 1844, on the night the Bab declared his mission to Mullah Hussein in Shiraz. His childhood was happy but brief. He had not yet reached the age of 9 when, in the summer of 1852, a storm burst upon the Babi community, of which his father was a prominent and admired leader. Soon thousands of Babis would fall victim to the cruel fanaticism of the clerical and secular authorities of a corrupt and barbarous regime. Baha'u'llah was thrown into the Siyah Chal, the black pit, a dark subterranean dungeon. Abdul Baha visited his father there and retained for the rest of his life the, I quote again, ineffable vision of a father, haggard, disheveled, freighted with chains. Neighborhood boys now made Abdul Baha the object of their malice, pelted him with stones, vilified him, and overwhelmed him with ridicule. There followed exile and Abdul Baha's emergence in early youth as his father's amanuensis, shield, and deputy. As he grew into maturity and eventually reached old age, everyone who came into contact with him was deeply impressed with this person that displayed the most unusual combination of mind and heart, majesty and humility, gentleness and firmness, justice and mercy, involvement and detachment. We are fortunate to have accounts of meetings with Abdul Baha written by learned Orientalists, government officials, artists, poets, doctors, the wealthy and the poor, believers and skeptics, followers and antagonists, but all testify to his greatness and to his irresistible charm. Edward Granville Brown, a leading British Orientalist at Cambridge, who first met Abdu'l-Baha in Akka before Abdu'l-Baha was appointed Center of the Covenant, writes, "Seldom have I seen one whose appearance impressed me more. A tall, strongly built man, holding himself straight as an arrow, with white turban and raiment, long black locks reaching almost to the shoulders, broad, powerful forehead, indicating a strong intellect combined with an unswerving will, eyes keen as a hawk's, and strongly marked but pleasing features. Such was my first impression of Abbas Effendi. Subsequent conversations with him served only to heighten the respect with which his appearance had from the first inspired me. One more eloquent of speech, more ready of argument, more apt of illustration, more intimately acquainted with the sacred books of the Jews and the Christians and the Mohammedans, could, I should think, scarcely be found. These qualities, combined with a bearing at once majestic and genial, made me cease to wonder at the influence and esteem which he enjoyed even beyond the circle of his father's followers. And then an early American pilgrim who reached Akka just a few years after Brown's visit wrote, "Of the first meeting, I can remember neither joy nor pain nor anything that I can name. I had been carried too suddenly to too great a height. My soul had come into contact with the divine spirit, and this force, so pure, so holy, so mighty, had overwhelmed me. We could not remove our eyes from his glorious face. We heard all that he said. We drank tea with him at his bidding, but existence seemed suspended. And when he arose and suddenly left us, we came back with a start to life, but never again, oh, never again, thank God, to the same life of this earth. In the might and majesty of his presence, our fear was turned to perfect faith, our weakness into strength, our sorrow into hope, and ourselves forgotten in our love for him. The incomparable person of Abdu'l-Baha produced such a strong and lasting impression on the believers that some began to think of him as Christ's return, a messenger of God, and to attribute to him a station equal to that of Baha'u'llah. In elucidating the true station of the Master, a title used by Baha'u'llah exclusively for Abdu'l-Baha, Shoghi Effendi grants that, I quote again, "It would be indeed difficult for us who stand so close to such a tremendous figure and are drawn by the mysterious power of so magnetic a personality to obtain a clear and exact understanding of one who, not only in the dispensation of Baha'u'llah, but in the entire field of religious history, fulfills a unique station. That Abdu'l-Baha is not a manifestation of God, that though the successor of his father, he does not occupy a cognate station, are verities which lie embedded in the specific utterances of both the founder of our faith and the interpreter of his teachings. And yet, although Abdul Baha is not the equal of Baha'u'llah, he is, in the words of the Guardian again, the center of his covenant, the interpreter of his words, the perfect exemplar of his teachings, the embodiment of every Baha'i ideal, the incarnation of every Baha'i virtue, the mainspring of the oneness of humanity. Styles and titles that are implicit and find their truest, their highest and fairest expression in the appellation, in the name Abdul Baha. He is, above and beyond these appellations, the mystery of God, an expression by which Baha'u'llah himself has chosen to designate him, and which indicates how in the person of Abdul Baha the incompatible characteristics of human nature and superhuman knowledge and perfection have been blended and completely harmonized. Such was Abdul Baha's humility, and so great was his determination to prevent his followers from confusing his station with that of Baha'u'llah, that he repeatedly and in the strongest terms repudiated any suggestion of equality with his glorious father. In a tablet addressed to some American Baha'is, he wrote, stressing the meaning of the title he assumed after Abdul Baha's ascension. My name is Abdul Baha. My qualification is Abdul Baha. My reality is Abdul Baha. My praise is Abdul Baha. Thraldom to the blessed perfection is my glorious and refulgent diadem. And servitude to all the human race is my perpetual religion. No name, no title, no mention, no commendation have I, nor will ever have, except Abdul Baha. This is my longing. This is my greatest yearning. This is my eternal life. This is my everlasting glory. Although Baha'u'llah's ascension was a heavy blow to the small and struggling community of his followers, scattered in a few countries of the Middle East, Russian Central Asia and India, they found consolation in Abdul Baha, whose leadership most of them accepted with relief and joy. And now there began a new stage in the evolution of the faith under the guidance of its divinely appointed master. It moved beyond the confines of Islamic societies. A year after Baha'u'llah passed away, a Christian missionary read a paper at a session of the World Parliament of Religions in Chicago, mentioning a famous Persian sage who had expressed Christ-like sentiments, which the speaker wished to share with his audience. In another year, America would have its initial troop of dedicated Baha'is, the first Western apostles of the faith. The inspiration, education, and organization of Baha'i communities in North America and in Europe were the work of Abdul Baha, who avidly followed every development in the West, engaged in constant correspondence with new believers, and as soon as the Turkish Revolution released him from confinement in Palestine, undertook prolonged visits to the United States, Canada, and several of Western and Central European countries. The impact of Abdul Baha's journeys to the West cannot be overestimated. Some of us have had the privilege of knowing a number of early Baha'is who had experienced the presence of the Master in Chicago, in San Francisco, in Los Angeles, and here in New York. Friends, I wrote this before this morning's session, when you saw some who had seen Abdu'l-Baha when they were still little children. I will never forget the light in their eyes as they talked about the Master, whose influence dominated the rest of their lives. It is surely not an exaggeration to say that Abdu'l-Baha was the builder of the Baha'i community of the United States and Canada. Abdu'l-Baha's deeds cannot be summarized. In thousands of tablets to communities and individuals, as well in several books, he expounded, interpreted, and amplified the teachings of his father. He laid the foundation of the Baha'i administrative order. He charted the course of the expansion of the faith over the entire planet. He raised its prestige and defended it from attacks by external enemies and a handful of ambitious and unscrupulous renegades. His literary legacy, if one be permitted thus to refer to his writings, is enormous and constitutes, together with the writings of Baha'u'llah, the sacred scriptures of our faith. It includes personal correspondence or tablets to individuals, which a Persian scholar has called masterpieces of Persian epistolary genre. They are marked, he wrote, by directness, intimacy, warmth, love, humor, forbearance, and a myriad of other qualities that reveal the exemplary perfection of his personality. That legacy includes tablets addressed to individuals, tablets addressed to Baha'i communities, tablets to groups and congresses, tablets of visitation commemorating Baha'i heroes and martyrs, 3 books and treatises, discourses ranging from short talks to compilations such as Memorials of the Faithful and some answered questions. And last but not least, the hundreds of prayers he revealed on all occasions, prayers that are recited daily by millions of his followers in every land. The same Persian scholar to whom I have already referred writes of these prayers. He says that these partake in the fullest measure of poetic qualities. The purity and sanctity of natural imagery reveal a state of cosmic harmony. The musicality of some of them transcends limitations of language. Poetry is made to serve the ultimate goal of rising above the murmur of syllables and sounds. The emotional intensity of some of Abdu'l-Baha's prayers, especially those that recall the sufferings of and separation from Baha'u'llah, is unrivaled. And when the appointed hour struck for Abdu'l-Baha to join his glorious father, he left us his will and testament, the charter of the New World Order, one of the fundamental documents of this faith. How poor indeed is one's capacity to tell of Abdu'l-Baha, to describe his station, to glorify his deeds. Baha'u'llah exalted him far above our ken. But he gave us Abdu'l-Baha, the perfect human being, the source of inspiration, of love, of consolation and comfort. He is both our closest friend and the yardstick with which we measure good and evil. He is both the exemplar and the assurance of forgiveness. He is both master and servant of the beloved of God. I know of no better words with which to conclude these remarks than the words the Master himself wrote, words that are recited or chanted every day at his resting place on Mount Carmel. Words that tell us the true purpose of our existence. He is the all-glorious. O God, my God, lowly and tearful, I raise my suppliant hands to thee and cover my face in the dust of that threshold of thine, exalted above the knowledge of the learned and the praise of all that glorify thee. Graciously look upon thy servant, humble and lowly at thy door, with the glances of the eye of thy mercy, and immerse him in the ocean of thine eternal grace. Lord, he is a poor and lowly servant of thine, enthralled and imploring thee, in tears before thy face, calling to thee and beseeching thee, saying, O Lord my God, give me thy grace to serve thy loved ones. Strengthen me in my servitude to thee. Illumine my brow with the light of adoration in the court of holiness and of prayer to thy kingdom of grandeur. Help me to be steadfast at the heavenly entrance of thy gate, and aid me to be detached from all things within thy holy precincts. Lord, give me to drink from the chalice of selflessness. With its robe clothe me, and in its ocean immerse me. Make me as dust in the pathway of thy loved ones, and grant that I may offer up my soul for the earth ennobled by the footsteps of thy chosen ones in thy path, O Lord of glory in the highest. With this prayer doth thy servant call thee, at dawntide and in the night season. Fulfill his heart's desire, O Lord. Illumine his heart, gladden his bosom, kindle his light, that he may serve thy cause and thy servants. Thou art the bestower, the pitiful, the most bountiful, the gracious, the merciful, the compassionate.
Dear friend, we are about to see a portion of the film of Abdul Baha, which he gave permission to record during his visit to New York in 1912. The film is silent. We ask that you remain seated during the film. We would like to now close today's program with the tablet of visitation of Abdul Baha, read in French.
Ô Dieu mon Dieu, humble et éploré, j'élève vers toi des mains suppliantes et j'enfouis mon visage dans la poussière de ton seuil qui est exalté au-dessus de la connaissance du savant et de la louange de tout ce qui te glorifie. Daigne jeter un regard miséricordieux sur ton serviteur, humble et modeste, devant ta porte, et plonge-le dans l'océan de ta grâce éternelle. Seigneur, voici ton pauvre et modeste serviteur, soumis et implorant, captif en ta main, te priant avec ferveur, confiant en toi, en larmes devant ta face, t'appelant et t'implorant en ces mots. Ô Seigneur mon Dieu, accorde-moi ta grâce pour te servir, tes bien-aimés, fortifie-moi dans ta servitude envers toi, illumine mon front par la lumière de l'adoration, en ta cour de sainteté et par la lumière de la prière en ton royaume de grandeur. Aide-moi à être désintéressé devant le seuil de ton entrée céleste et à me détacher de toutes choses dans ton enceinte sacrée. Seigneur, fais-moi boire au calice du renoncement, revêt-moi de sa robe et plonge-moi dans son océan. Fais que je sois comme la poussière dans le chemin de tes bien-aimés et permets que j'offre mon âme pour la terre ennoblie par les pas de tes élus dans ton sentier. Ô Seigneur de gloire dans le Très-Haut, par cette prière, ton serviteur t'appelle à l'aube et dans la nuit. Exauce le désir de son cœur, ô Seigneur. Éclaire et réjouis son âme, illumine son esprit, afin qu'il serve ta cause et tes serviteurs. Tu es le dispensateur, le compatissant, le généreux, le miséricordieux, le bienveillant. Abdul Baha.